You're listening to Battling Opioids, the podcast. Battling Opioids, the podcast, now on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Google Podcast, TuneIn, Amazon, YouTube, and now radio.com.
Jerry Stropnicky is an actor, writer, and director. He is also committed to working with people in their communities, helping them create art from their stories, and more importantly, listen to each other, which creates a path to healing and change. Jerry spoke with us at the WVIA studio and told us about his theater experience and how he got started with community storytelling. He also describes his work in Harlan, Kentucky, with a community impacted by the opioid epidemic. So you are a co-founder of the Bloomsburg Theater Ensemble.
Yes, I am.
Did you grow up in Bloomsburg?
No, I grew up outside of New York City in Bergen County, New Jersey, and then went to school in Chicago at Northwestern. And then I traveled a bunch trying to find my theatrical heroes around the world, and then landed in Bloomsburg in 1976 to study with Elvina Krause. And Elvina Krause was a great American acting teacher, theater teacher. Soon the class became an ensemble. One of the things that my comrades, Jim Good, who's still at BTE, and Whit McLaughlin, who is now in Philadelphia at a company called New Paradise, we had gone to Europe and saw hundreds of shows. And we came back with the realization that there's a lot of bad work happening, a lot of great work happening, but the best work tended to come out of ongoing ensembles. There was something about that process which made consistently stronger work. So that's what made us start Bloomsburg Theater Ensemble. And Elvina Krause was our artistic director until she passed away in 1981. And we just kept going. And we did tons of classics. BT is still going on. But now and then we started to make original pieces. And those original pieces, especially as they listened to local story, started to create an energy in the space and in the community that was amazing. And it was after doing one of those, Letters to the Editor, which was devised from 200 years of letters to local newspapers. And we would do it, and people wouldn't leave the theater. I mean, it's a different energy. And someone who became very important in my life, a poet and playwright named Joe Carson. I was working on one of Joe's plays. This goes back to around 1998. She had already started to make these community story plays in the Deep South. And when she saw Letters to the Editor, she literally grabbed me by the collar and said, "Come on, we're going to dinner." And that dinner ended up lasting the next 13 years because she got me working with her first as her director and later as her co-writer and later as her successor, I guess, making community story plays around the country. And these are plays that invite a community and encourage and allow a community to tell their own stories and to put them into a frame that is gorgeous and beautiful and wonderful and communicates out. And the amazing thing is that communities through these works can begin to have the conversations that will solve the problems they're dealing with.
Can you give some examples of these story plays that you've been involved with?
I have made plays with communities around all kinds of topics, around racial incident or around natural disaster, flood recovery, what that means. What does it mean? Redefine yourself in terms of that. The coming of a fracking industry, the bullying of a gay student in a high school that leads to a Gay Straight Alliance Club, and a huge explosion in a Bible Belt community that follows that. And working with communities battling the opioid crisis. For that, I had a really interesting window because I was brought in on a project with Joe. The two of us went into Harlan County, Kentucky together in 2004. And if you do your history on the opioid crisis in America, that was the epicenter. That's where things were starting. That's where these big pharma companies were dumping the drugs. It was sort of a trial area, a poor and remote and struggling area that had legit pain concerns. You had a lot of coal miners, not the anthracite like around here, but the bituminous coal miners with legit pain. And then you have this synthetic morphine that becomes available, and mix that with a great deal of poverty and need. The fact that stuff that's so powerful. So you would have these older gentlemen who had a legit reason, a black lung or a missing limb or a bad back, and they would get a prescription. The stuff was so powerful, they said, well, I don't need 30 of these to get through the month. Well, maybe I can get by on 10. Figured out that there was a market to sell the other 20. And with that, they could get the food to feed their family. And pretty soon, you've got a crisis on your hands. Because the drug companies, very quickly, as they're doing around here, say, oh, there's a market. I mean, there was that doctor in Mount Carmel just recently. 6 million doses in Mount Carmel, Pennsylvania? Really? There's a legit reason for that? No, there is not. So is it the user? Is it the people who are getting it to the user? Is it the pharmacies? Is it the doctors? Is it Big Pharma who is pushing that? Where's the money going? Where's the flow of money? And so Harlan County, back in 2004, the people at this visionary community college, Southeast Kentucky Community and Technical College, wrote a grant to the Rockefeller Foundation and said, we want to use art to explore what's happening here. And did. And we made the first couple of a series of plays called the Higher Ground plays, which are having a real impact there as people, all kinds of people, tell their stories. It doesn't come from top down. It isn't like, this is what you should do to solve your, or if we do this, you'll figure it out. No, it's people sharing their stories from their hearts, their losses, their gains, their celebrations. It's all woven together. So the community leaves with a sense of, oh my, we can do this. And part of it is the play's good enough. They say, if we can do that, we can do this too.
And what this meant to you personally.
I feel very fortunate to have backed into this lifelong quest to find ways to actually release the potential power of the form. There is a way, without lecturing people, to help a community begin to talk to each other so it can solve its problems together. The reason these work is less the quality of the art on stage, although that's really important, and it's less the dialogue. It is the fact that because you're making something together, you keep people in the room long enough to have the hard conversations. We avoid the hard conversations. We walk out. We have lots of reasons. Oh, sorry, I got to go. I got to get gas in my car. I got to pick up my kid, whatever. But once we're invested in making something together and somebody says something that you want to question or that ticks you off, but you need each other to make this thing together, you're going to have that conversation.
How do you get people to that point, to that stage? What goes into that process?
Well, the process begins when people or a subgroup or an organization or a college within a community says, we should do a story play here. We should do something with our stories. A group does an invitation, and then a process begins where we start listening to stories, story circles, maybe a workshop around personal narrative, just getting people excited and knowing that they have a story. Frequently, we don't feel our stories are worth listening to or that they're valid. Everybody's got great stories, just a matter of cracking them open. Then a core begins to say, we have stories here. We feel the power. Can that be applied to what's going on here, whatever it is? And it might be opioids in this community. One of the things is about making sure you hear all the voices. When we were looking at floods of money and floods of drugs in Kentucky, it became very clear because the cast and the community artists we were working with called us out and said, we're not hearing in this piece yet the voices of the people struggling with opioid addiction. And if they're not included in a way that listens and gives dignity and is not judgmental, we're never going to solve this problem. And so one young man wrote a song that he was portraying someone who had gotten involved with opioid addiction. And he wrote a song looking at the temptation, using the temptations of Christ as the center of the lyric. All this can be yours, boy, but in the end, all is mine. It was stunning. And the conversations that opened up in community, because it happened right in front of everybody, that's where change starts to happen.
You're describing how the community changes throughout this process. I can only imagine how individuals change how they view themselves. Once they contribute, whether it's their story or then go on to perform in some way where they didn't expect that of themselves.
It's deeply validating, and maybe more so in America today. In 2019, we live in such a celebrity-oriented culture where, quite literally, we know everything about Kim Kardashian. I don't know why, but we do. We know what they had for breakfast. The more that happens, the less sitting in our homes here in these hills and valleys, we feel that anything we do is valid or important. Validation becomes a real powerful instrument in this work. To say your story matters. Our story matters. Who we are here matters. It's a spotlight that we get to throw on these stages, in these gymnasiums and various other places where this work happens. It's a spotlight that media can throw. If we really value these stories, we can help get them out there so that people can know that they matter. And I'm going to put on my little preaching hat here. The more people know that they matter, the less people fall into despair. And the less people fall into despair, the more they will find ways to be healthy around each other.
So you did this work in Harlan in 2004.
Through 2009. I was there for 5 years, on and off.
What stories have you heard out of this community since then?
Well, they wouldn't stop making the plays. Over time, they went back and forth, but the agency, who makes the decisions, is really important. The work becomes ever more powerful when those closest to the issue being looked at are the ones making the decisions. They've continued to make plays. They've just finished their 8th play, the touring of it, and they're working on their 9th. So here it is 15 years later, and the community continues to work. They're not always of that size or scale, but they're still happening. They're getting commissions to move these plays into various places. That's the core higher ground. But I was at a thing over the last couple of years called Hurricane Gap Institute, which is a gathering in Kentucky of one of those. There were 8 different community story plays that gathered to swap stories and to build capacity by learning from each other. So Higher Ground has inspired 8 more. Causality is really hard to nail down. You can see things through correlation. That corner, especially Harlan County, is making real progress. And it was once the worst place in the nation in terms of the opioid crisis. And you could say, well, maybe everybody that was going to die is dead. I mean, you could say that. That's kind of a dark way to say that. But the people there say that in sharing our stories, we've made a difference. Things have happened. That's what keeps them going. You tell me your story, I'll tell you my story. We now have a bond that lifts us to another place. And that process of listening is in itself health-giving. We're not good at listening to each other. When I do Story Circle, which I do a lot in my practice, people are always moved to say, I can't remember the last time I got to talk for 3 minutes without anybody stopping me. Just think about that simple thing. Once we begin to do that and make it part of our practice, many things become possible. Does it solve everything? No. My goal now is to plant seeds so other people take on this work. And I'll go anywhere I'm invited that we can make that possible. Because this is a way through despair.
Recovery starts with a call. Call 1-800-662-HELP or visit battlingopioids.org.
It doesn't take long to become addicted to opioids. 13 Pennsylvanians die from them every day. Geisinger is committed to ending opioid addiction with both prevention and treatment. In the last 3 years, we've reduced the amount of opioids we prescribe by 50%, and we've opened 4 medication-assisted treatment centers across the state to help patients recover from addiction. Learn more at geisinger.org/haveenough.